Morning, we're learning at Schus Refuah Shlema Filan Chai Basarach. We're on Daf Chaf Amid Beis. Dr. Gemara. So we had asked the Kasha that Rebbe is the man the Amr who says that Eitzim is cold carbon, and so therefore, how could we say? So and the Brisa had said that we would take out, we'd exclude Eitzim and Dam from the requirement of Malicha because they're called. So we said that since they're called carbon, is it, what was the word? Carbon. I would have thought that it would include dam and eitzim because they're called a carbon, so therefore they should be included to need melach. So we learn from a pasuk not like that. The Gemara said though, who is the man Amr who says that we need that eitzim is called carbon? That's Rebbe, and Rebbe is also a man Amr who says that eitz does need melach; it needs salt. So So how are we going to understand this memra that says this brisa that says that we're going to learn out from the pasuk that melach is not needed on eitzim? So Gemara sami mikan eitzim. And we're going to have to change the brisa. It's not saying eitzim and dam; it's saying something else. So what is the pasuk coming to exclude? If it's not going to be eitzim and dam, but it's dam and something else, what is it called? We have two psukim there. So one pasuk, one is the klalu prat. We said excluded eitzim, and the next one is me'al minchasecha excludes dam. So it can't be dam because we already have that as part of the pasuk, and that's been excluded. So apik eitzim on Amar Aleph, apik eitzim v'ayal nesachim. So rather, we're going to have to exclude eitzim and instead say that what the pasuk is coming to tell you that nesachim, those are the wine that's poured out on the mizbeach together with the carbon, that doesn't need melach in it. The Tanya, avala yayin v'hadam v'eitzim v'aktoiris ain't to unin melach. The yayin, which is in the nesachim, as well as dam and eitzim and ktoiris, all don't need salt. Money. Who could this brisa be? We just said that the brisa is saying nesachim, but it also includes dam and eitzim and ktoiris. I Rebbe kasha eitzim. If it's Rebbe, we just said Rebbe holds eitzim doesn't need melech. I Rabban and kashik tires, and if it's a Rabban we're chaylik on Rebbe, but we had said in our earlier in our list of the many things that are excluded from melech. One of those things was katiris, so that was the Rabbanan hold that katiris doesn't need melech. So who is this mandama? Who is this brisa? So Gemara Haitana who the Tanya Shmuel b'noish Rabbi Yechon break oim ma prat mefurish davish makabel tuma va'elu ishim yeshnam mizbeach achitzin, just like, so back to the klal upratu klal that says that we say by melach, that the Torah starts with the klal and that's mefaret mincha, and then it goes back at the end and says kol carbon. So it's a klal upratu klal enika in a prat. What is the prat? Prat is mincha. So mincha is something that's makabel toma. It's a Michael. Michael is makabel toma. Va'oil ishim gets burnt. The kaimitz gets burnt. V'yeshnam mizbeach achitz, and it goes on the mizbeach chitzin. Al kol davar makabel toma va'oil ishim v'yeshnam mizbeach chitzin. Yatsu eitzim she'em makabel toma. So that excludes wood that's not makabel toma. So it's not like Rebbe. Yatsu dam v'yayin she'ein oilim ishim. So it excludes dam and yayin that are not burnt. The dam is thrown on the mizbeach, and the yayin is poured on the mizbeach. Yatsa k'tayrish ein al mizbeach achitzin, and the k'tayrish is burnt on the mizbeach hapnimi, not on the mizbeach achitzin. So this is going to be the mandam who says both. There's Rabbi Yechon who's going to say eitzim are excluded, not like Rabbi that doesn't need salt, and he says k'tayrish is excluded, not like the Rabbanan who say k'tayrish does need salt. So again, so that would be, so we can say apik eitzim v'ayil nesachim. So tomorrow, I have a different question. At the time of the matcha kroladam, Why do we need a pasuk? We're saying we're learning out from the pasuk, both like we said, al kol min chasecha, mal min chasecha is Mamaya dam that it doesn't need melech. Only because of this pasuk. Blood would need to be salted before it goes on the mizbeach. So the fact that keeping the machan nafik lemiteres dam. Since you salt dam, it's no longer considered to be dam, which is very interesting to those of us who know a little bit. I don't really understand how this works. If you know that, I guess this is not halacha lemaisa, but we know the way we get salt out of our meat. Dam is our meat has to be salted before we eat it. Is by putting the dam and then we throw out that dam. That dam is considered treif. But we're saying now that dam, the isser of eating dam, does not include salted dam. The Amar Ziri Amar Chanina, dam shebishloi, any over love. Dam that was salted.
Didn't we have like a similar svar with the chaylev? Remember we had those treif, but we put it on the mizbeach.
This is talking about legabi eating it. We're not talking about going on the mizbech. We're talking about
Oh,
literally your dam is also to eat, right?
right.
And we're saying over here, Ziri is saying dam. We're going to see the dam that was salted does not have an iser achila.
Uh,
We give them a chanav the dam, and we were going to see the Amar Ziri Amar Chanina dam shebishloi eina over alav, dam that was cooked, so it became hardened by cooking. Does no longer have it's no longer treated as dam. For Yehuda Miziri, dam shemalchu eina over alav. He says dam shemalchu that you salted, also you're not going to be over for eating. Rav Yehuda Didei Amar Evam Shetzal V'Helen Ein Bahem Mishum L'Reich Nichayach. The limbs that are supposed to be burnt on mizbeach, if you first roast them before that, it's missing l'reich nichayach since it's already cooked. The cooking on the mizbeach is not going to provide a good smell because it's already pre-cooked. Doesn't provide the smell. So that's it's not also not going to be it's not going to be roy for the mizbeach. These different things that cooking changes the status of something. So we're just going to look quickly at the Rashi. Dam shebishloi. We have because it's important to know what the svara behind this is. Dam shebishloi bein the chulin bein the kachim, whether of chulin or kachim va'achlu, and you eat it. Ain't no over love. You're not over for eating dam. The only dam that there's an isser eating, meaning not just eating in your house and when you're making you're taking a rare steak. It's also going to be if you saw you're not going to be a chayiv on it unless it's something dam that was roy to be brought on the mizbeach. The dam kashim mishabishul chazil milsei. Once it's cooked, it's no longer shaykh to be brought on the mizbeach. But nafak mitaris dam umeliach harei kuresech. Salting it also cooks something. That's when we pickle it. It has the same effect that it's treated as if it cooks it. So salting dam takes it out of its status of something that can be brought in the mizbech, and therefore you're no longer chayiv for eating it. You're only chayiv for eating things that are able to be eaten. So for Ekta Gemara, what do we need a pasuk to tell you that the dam doesn't need to be salted, but if it would be salted, it would no longer be dam, and it wouldn't be roy to be used for the mizbech. You couldn't use it for the avodah. Once it's treated no longer as dam, the guy be eating it. Also, we're saying it. The reason why it can't be eaten is because it's not roy for the mizbech. I might think that when it says you have to salt the dam, you just put like one little sprinkle of salt. That's not enough to change its status, that it becomes salted blood, and it goes out of its rule, it goes out of its identification as blood, and therefore not roy lekapara, and therefore roy to be eaten. Now, and therefore it's still not going to be roy to be eaten, and therefore maybe when we say that you have to salt it, it means just a little bit of salt. Gufa. Now we're going to go further on this assertion of Seiri that dam that's salted loses its status as dam to be assert that it's now allowed to be eaten by a person stamazai. And like Rashi said, the reason is because it's not anymore roy lekapara. It's not right to be brought in the mizbeach. Gufa amar ziri amar chini dam shebishlu eina evelav. You're not over for eating it. Yosef Rav ka'amalal hashmaitza. He was saying this over. Esvei abaya hikves adam va'achlu. If someone solidified dam and then he means he cooked it essentially, and he boiled out the liquid from it, and he made it hard, and he ate it. Or almost exactly the opposite. He took chelev, which is fat, and he boiled it so that it became a liquid, the gamai, and he swallowed it as a liquid. Chayiv. He's still chayiv. Now the chiddush by the chelev is because the Torah says you're not allowed to eat chalev, so maybe I would think that drinking it is okay. But hikves adam va'achloi, he's saying chayiv, even though you boiled it out and it's no longer roy to be thrown on the mizbech, it's still chayiv. So why is salting different? How could Ziri say that if you salt it, it's not salting is really just a form of cooking? So why would he say that you're potter? So when do we say that it loses its status as blood? That's when he cooked it on a fire. So that's a real good cooking. If you leave it out in the sun, that it's not fully cooked, but it's just warmed up and it gets a little bit, it becomes a little bit more solidified. But that liquid, as we're going to see in the Gemara, so if it was cooked on a fire, then it's permanently changed. It's no longer blood. But chama, once it will cool off, it will go back to being liquid blood. We know there's a rule that something that was pushed away from being able to be used as a carbon, it's permanently unable to be used as a carbon. Dam shekarash, dam that again solidified. Va'achlu, it was left out, and it became hardened. That mao amalei hayel v'nitcha yitcha. He says since it was pushed away, once it was no longer able to be eaten, it's pushed away. So how do you answer this price? So we said it's something once it's pushed away. What does it make a difference if you leave it out in the sun that it could be restored to being liquid blood? Even so, since it had a period in which it was unable to be used as a carbon, it should forever be pushed out from being a carbon, and therefore it should be able to be eaten permanently. Ishtik. He had no response to this. Amalei, Dilma, I think they take out the word vadai. Amalei, Dilma kan. Tevis vadai nimchak. Right? It doesn't really make sense. It always bothers me when people say it's like for sure a problem. It's for sure might be a problem. It could be one. It could either be certain or it could be might be. It can't be for sure might be a problem. So Dilma kan bechatoyis achitzonius. Over here we're talking about chatoyis achitzonius. Kan bechatoyis apnimius. The Brisa, when we talk about chatoyis achitzonius that were out in the sun, which becomes just temporarily hardened, it still remains kosher to be brought on the mizbeach chachitzin, which we're going to say because it's not. We're going to see from a pasuk. We're going to see the Gemara is going to say that the chatas chachitz, the karbanos chachitzonius is less. There's a lower bar to bring the dam, so it's not idche from being used as a carbon. But the chatois apnimis it will. Amar. So he said, this is, Rava had been flummoxed by this kasha. He says that you reminded me of this taka good teretz. At the Carson, Milsa, the Amar Rechizda. You're reminding what Rechizda said, Dam shekarash, dam that solidified, by chatoyis va'achlu, and you eat them chayiv. It's still going to be chayiv. So you see, it's not idcha. The lokach v'nosan rachman avahai ba'alakicha nesinahu. Since the gabi the chatois hapnimius, the Torah says it has to be placed on the mizbeach. The dam is placed on the mizbeach. So even if it got a little bit hardened, it still can be placed on the mizbeach. But chayis apnimis yoichlu, you could eat it potter. If you eat it, you potter. But rachman. Over there, you need spritzing, you need sprinkling. Something that's hardened cannot be sprinkled. So therefore, the chatois apnimius, even if it's just slightly hardened, it's dochui from being on the mizbeach apnimi. But mizbeach achitzin is not a dichui because it can be placed. The dam that hardened is not capable of tefillah and hazah. Rava Didei Amar, Rava himself actually disagrees with this. Amar afil b'chatois apnimis va'achlu chayiv. He says even chatois apnimis that harden somewhat, and you eat them a chayiv. Ha'il connected roi b'chatois achitzonis. Since there is a case, he says we don't look at it that dam. We look at different dams depending on where they're intended to go. You look at dam as a whole, and since dam as a whole is roi on the chatois hachitzonius, this dam is not considered to be dachui, and it's going to be chayiv if he eats it. Amra papa hilkach dam chamor, the dam of a treifa animal like a chamor, shekarish that hardened va'achlu, and you eat it chayiv. You chayiv in addition to being chayiv for eating a chamor, you also are chayiv for eating dam. It's like we said, the standard for deciding whether you're chayiv eating dam is whether it's capable of kapara, whether it can be used to the kapara, and this, since it's connected roy b'chatois achitzainis, if it would be a kosher animal, it would be roy to go on the chatois achitzainis. So we say, even though this animal is not kosher, since dam as a whole is something that could go on the mizbeach, he's going to be chayiv for eating it. Amr of Gidul Amaziri, dam bein lach bein yavish chaytzitz. Dam, when someone goes into the mikvah, let's say he's a zav, he has to be toivel. Whether if he has blood on him, whether it's liquid blood or whether it dried on him, it's chaytzitz. He's not going to be the tefillah is not going to be a tefillah. Meisvei hadam v'had yoy v'had vash v'achelev. We say about all these things, including dam and ink and honey and milk. If you are toivel with them, they're not chaytzitz. We just said whether it's liquid or solid, it is chaytzitz. It depends on whether it's when he says lach and yavish, he means. It depends if it's basically if it's a little it had time to sort of cook. Rashi says if it's once it started attaching a little bit to the person, so then when he goes into the mikvah, it doesn't get come off of him. That's going to be chaytzitz. But if it's still liquid, even though it started to get yavish, it started to dry, but it's still mostly liquid, that it doesn't stick to the person's skin and it will float away when he goes into the mikvah, it's not chaytzitz. So you could be even yavish, as long as it's not sarach, as long as it doesn't stick to the person's skin, it's still going to be chatzitza. It doesn't stick, it's not going to be a chatzitza. Zok the Gemara. We had a second pasuk, legabi, the way the pasuk said the din of malicha is v'kol korban minchasecha b'melech timlach. Every carbon of mincha you should salt it with salt. Timlach l'mayasa. What is this? B'melech timlach. What is this verb that you should salt it? L'chadetanya b'melech yachal tavaynuhu. I might think tavaynu. The Gemara is going to conclude tavaynu means maybe you should just put a light sprinkling like bina. Bina is knowledge. As we all know, if you walk in the streets, knowledge and intelligence is very lightly sprinkled amongst the populace. So saying that maybe melech also just needs a light sprinkling. That's going to be the Gemara's end. Talmud Leimer, timlach. That's what the Torah says, timlach, that you have to do a full-fledged malicha. It has to be salted well. Eat timlach yachal b'mei melech. If it says timlach, I might think that would be even using salt water. Talmud Leimer b'melech. As the Torah says, b'melech, it must be actual salt, not salt water. V'loy tashbis melech. Tashbis is a lashon shvisa, like Shabbos. You shouldn't ever have a rest from doing melech. Hava melech she'ena sheveses. Has to be melech that does not rest. Ve'ezu melech sdaimis. In Sdaim, they have a constant supply of melech. U'minayin shem loy mata melech sdaimis, and maybe melech istruknis. But the Torah tells you, even though ideally you should use melech staimis, which is constant, it constantly, in the Dead Sea, there's always a source of salt. How do you know you could even use salt from a mine if you can't get melech staimis? A mine, is not as certain, it's not as constant as melech staim. Tamalayim takrav kolshu takrav mikol makam. You learn from takrav that he should be do any amount. Takra mikol makom, under any circumstance. Takra afilu b'Shabbos, he should be makriv even on Shabbos. Takra afilu b'tuma, you should put melech on even something that's tamei. When you have a carbon tamei tzibur that we know tumah is hutra b'tzibur, you also have to put melech on it. So we see that tells you always have to you have to do the salt, even if it can't be ideal, even if it can only be with melech istruknis. My tevanu. What is that lashon of tevanu? I would say that melech would be tevanu. Amar Rabba Barula hachikama yachal yisbainenu keteven betet. I might think you have to put such large amounts that that it could be used to make bricks, like you put straw to make bricks, like they did in Mitzrayim. So maybe you have to use such a huge amount of salt. So that's what the Torah says. Timlach, that even a smaller amount of salt. It should have said yizbainu. That would be more of yizbainu keteven. Should be like teven. Maybe it means that he should put on salt like a building, which Rashi says you make like a row on top of a row. You should put rows and rows, layers and layers of salt. Yivnenu mibayale. Why yisbainenu? It should yivnenu. Alamarava yachal tevenu. You have to read it instead of the way we're reading. Instead of reading tivnu, I don't know exactly which one is which. Let's see. Shita says, yeah. Yachal tivainuhu, tivainehu. I might think, my tivainehu, Amar Ravashi, Yachal yitim by tam kabina. This is what the final pshat is. I would have thought tivainehu, a lashon of bina, that it should just be a slight taste, like bina, like understanding is only a slight taste amongst people. If you want to see the Rashi, it says, Leisenis tam kabina ba'adam. Talmud Leimer timlech, that's what we have timlech to tell you that it has to be a little more than that. Ketzeru oisa, so how much salt do you actually need? Mevu ha'ever, he brings the limb, v'noisen of melech, and he puts salt on it, v'chayze v'hayvchay, he turns it over, v'noisen of melech, he puts on the other side, so it's covered with melech. Umaleyu, and he brings it like that on the mizbech. Amar Abaya, v'chein likdeira. Also, when you're using, this is exactly the same process which you use to remove blood from meat. You also have to put that amount of salt on both sides, on all sides. Tanu Rabbanan, melech shal gabeya amid beis, melech shal gabeya aver moyelim bay. The melech that's on the aver, meaning the aver that's being brought on the mizbeach, there's a din meila on it as long as the salt is on the aver. It's part. It's, as we're going to see, it's going to be considered part of the carbon, and there's the din meila until you finish the avodah. Shal gabe akevesh rosh mizbeach, but the salt that falls as they're salting the uh, the aver, the carbon that goes onto the ramp and it goes on the top of the mizbeach, ein moilim by that. There's no din meila. What do we see that while it's on the carbon it has a din me'ilah? Because the Torah says you'll bring it to Hashem and the Kohanim will put salt on it. And it calls the carbon the Ivarim together with the salt and oil Hashem. So you see it's called part of the carbon after the salt is considered part of the carbon after it's put on the carbon. Just we'll do another minute. Because I don't know about you, Menachem, but by me, in here, if you come to have 10 minutes late, you're already missing Shema. Tells you that the Kohanim can be nana, they can enjoy, they could use the salt. That only means that they could put it on their carbon. But Lagabi, the meaning when they themselves bring a carbon, they could use the public salt for their karbanis. But when they eat their karbanis, as a kind, they're allowed to eat karbanis, they're not allowed to use that salt. That means you could use public salt. Kahanim could use the public salt to salt their karbanis. And lechel that they are not allowed to do is they're not allowed to eat their kachim with salt. In fact, the Gemara doesn't make any sense. We let them use the public salt to salt the hides of the karbanis that are going to belong to the kaihanim. And you say to eat the kachim, they can't. Why would you say that public salt can be used for salting the hides, but it can't be used for them eating? The Tanya, where do we see that it could be used for salting hides? There are 3 places that the public salt that's used in the Beis Hamikdash is placed. The Lishkas Hamelach, in the place where they store the salt, Valgabe Akavesh, on top of the ram, Rosh Mizbech. The Lishkas Hamelach in the chamber of the salt, Sham Melch and Iris, Kachim. That's where they would salt the iris. You see that the public salt was kept to salt the hides. So, how could it be that they can't use the salt for their food? The verse continues, Agabe Kevesh, they had on the ram, Sham Molchan Esayivarim, that's where they would salt the limbs. Beresham Mizbeach, Sham Molchan Akaimis, Valavine Vaktaris, and Minchas Kehanim, Minchas Kaim Mashiach, and Minchas Esachem Va'el Esayiv. All these things that don't need Kmitza, they would all get salted on top of the Mizbeach. Or including the Kaimitz, as well as the things that don't need Kmitza that are about to be burned, they all get salted there. Elamai lekarbanim. So what does it mean that the Kehanim can use it lekarbanim? Lachilas karbanim. That means that they could use the salt when they're eating the karbanis. Or my lachila the chulin. It's talking about they can't use the salt for eating chulin. So chulin pshita. What do I need a pasuk to tell me that you can't use public salt for a kohen who's eating stamazai? My boyhosam. What is they even chulin? You're not allowed to bring chulin into the azara. So what would be the possible svara to say that kehanim could use the public salt, the tzibur salt, for their chulin? So even the Torah says that kehanim are eating their basar, have to first eat enough other basar, chulin and of truma, that they should be eating when they're satiated. They shouldn't leave their meal unsatiated from the kachim. So that it's a partial chiyuv on them to eat chulin. They can't take the melech of kachim out of the Beis Hamikdash and eat it together with the chulin that they need to eat in order they should be able to eat lasoiva. The kabbanan means to be it means that they could be to put salt on the karbanis that they're bringing on the mizbeach on their own karbanis. Time to ask bezin, bezin loy. And we're saying over here this is a t'nai bezdin that they were allowed to use this melach. Hashu Yisrael Avina and Lekehanan Avina. How could it be that Yisrael uses the public salt when they're bringing their kabbanis? The Kehanim can't. The Kehanim L'chara are higher ranked than the Yisraelim as far as having access to kosher. The Tanya Yachal Ayman Harelai Mincha Yavi Melech Mitach Beisai Kedech maybe Levayim Mitach Beisai. Maybe he has to bring his own salt just like he brings his own levayna. The Dinu Nemer Hevi Mincha Vehevi Melech Never Hevi Mincha Vehevi levayna. The Torah says you should bring a mincha, and it says you have to bring you have to salt it, and it says also you have to bring a mincha, and you should bring levayna. Ma levayna mitach beisa, you have melech mitach beisa. Maybe the melech should be compared to levayna. That you should have to bring your own, a Yisrael. A klach darzu never heavy mincha v'heavy melech, but never heavy mincha v'heavy eitzim. The Torah says also that you should bring eitzim. Ma eitzim mishal tzibur af melech mishal tzibur. Maybe the salt should be compared to the eitzim that's comes from tzibur. Ner lemidaima. So we're gonna have to make an analysis. What is salt more like? Is it more like the levina? Is it more like the eitzim? Dan davar hanoi b'chol hazvachim, davar hanoi b'chol hazvachim. Eitzim is by all zvachim. V'alteichich levina sheina, and melech is on all kadshim. V'alteich levina sheina haggis b'chol hazvachim. Levina is only by a mincha, not by all karbanis. Klach darzu dan and davar haba ima b'kli echad. I'll compare the salt that goes onto the carbon, onto the different parts that go on the mizbeach, that get burnt on the mizbeach, and it goes onto the same kli as the thing that's being burned. And levina also is put in the same kli as the kaimitz. Who? We learn from the pasuk that melech comes from tzibur. So how could it be? So back to our original question, how could it be that, why would I think possibly that a kohen wouldn't use the tzibur's melech if a Yisrael who brings the carbon uses the tzibur's melech on his carbon? It's only needed kohen. But the Tanah number of Yehuda Heid ben Bukhri Yavna called kohen sheshaykel ve'ene chayte, called kohen sheshaykel ene chayte. Any kohen that doesn't that provides a shekel, if he decides to participate in the machzah shekel, is not doing anything wrong. So, according to, he doesn't have to give a shekel, but if he does, he hasn't done anything wrong. So the Gemara's teretz really is, as we're going to see, we'll stop over here, but the point is that since a kohen doesn't have to participate in the shekel, so the salt that's bought with those machzis shekel is not really his. So I would think only Yisrael, who participated in buying the shkolim, he should have a din that his melech is used by kachim, but not the kohens. So that's what we'll have to tell you. That's the chiddush that telling you that a kohen's shekel could be used. That the melech of the tzibur could be used on a kohen's carbon. Okay, we'll stop over here.
Right.
Shkoyach, I'm going to run off to davening. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.